This means you're failing English.
Me fail English? That's impossible.
Hi there, and welcome to Baseball by Design. I am SportsLogos.net minor league baseball correspondent Paul Caputo, broadcasting live, as always, from the Sunday Helmet Hall of Fame in my basement in Fort Collins, Colorado. I am so pleased to welcome back to the podcast designer extraordinaire Todd Radom. Todd Radom, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Paul. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing very well. This is one of my favorite things. Just like every once in a while on this podcast, we just check in and we usually find some like goofy, some goofy reason, some goofy excuse. On this episode, this is episode 107 of Baseball by Design. You and I spoke back on episode 58 last year. We did that episode about ligatures, which turned into a conversation about interlocking letters. And then during that episode, we said, hey, we're going to come back in about a year and talk about apostrophes, in particular, the Baltimore Orioles and their upside down backwards apostrophes. If you don't mind, we're going to go to the tape, Todd. I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but can I get you to commit in early 2024 to episode 107 on how come the Baltimore Orioles have that upside down backwards apostrophe in their logo?
Oh, I think you and I would. I'm first of all, sign me up. I will actually absolutely do it. And you and I, we could spit like all kinds of vitriol all over it.
You'll see, I had my math slightly wrong here. It is not 2024 yet. It is the end of 2023. But you were gracious enough to come back and talk about apostrophes. And I bet you we'll find some other things to talk about too. So happy end of the year. Happy almost the new year. Happy first holiday season in Philadelphia for you.
Yeah, actually, second holiday season. I moved here just about a year ago. If you recall, Paul, and I'm sure you do, you and I saw one another at the World Series in Philly in 2022. I was hoping for a repeat performance to be able to see you in person again and share a beer in 2023, but it was not to be. The wheels fell off the Phillies bus very, very suddenly, very unexpectedly.
Yeah.
Kind of a shocking World Series. The results of the World Series, insofar as the Rangers winning it, were not necessarily shocking, but the fact that it wasn't here, I was disappointed.
Well, I was thinking that, right? I was looking at the schedule and I was like, if they play the Astros, when they went up 2-0, I was thinking that they would have been the home team against the Astros and the road team against the Rangers. And so I was looking at the schedule. I had a big work event coming up. And so I was like, can I make this happen? And you're absolutely right. It's been, I can't believe it's already been a year since you moved to Philadelphia, and we ran into each other. Well, we coordinated a visit at Game 3 of the World Series, one that the Phillies won 7-0. Still my one and only ever World Series game that I attended in person. I did get to Phoenix this year to see games 4 and 5 of the National League Championship Series. So I saw that heartbreaking loss in Game 4 when the bullpen blew a late lead, and then saw a pretty handy win in Game 5, which I thought was basically the clincher, right? Like I thought that put the Phillies in the World Series, going back to Citizens Bank Park, needing to win 1 of 2. So yeah, it was heart-wrenching the way the wheels came off. In no small part because it meant you and I did not get to hang out and have a beer at Citizens Bank Park once again. So,
well, that was, here I am. I'm in what I would consider my adopted city. I have enjoyed cheering for the Phillies this season, but I don't have the lineage. I don't have the true hometown spirit and fandom that somebody like you would have. But this was a fun team to root for all season long. And I will say I went to 3 postseason games, one in each of the series at Citizens Bank Park with 3 different people. And I went 3-0. And I will say this, I went to game number 2 against Arizona. And I said to my friend who I was with, it was a 10-0 game, if I'm recalling that correctly.
Yeah.
I said, this series isn't coming back to Philadelphia. Well, I was wrong. Somebody without that literal attachment hometown thing can say something like that. He sort of blanched from it. He said, "Don't say that." And I was bad luck in that respect, but I don't I don't blame myself.
I don't blame you either, Todd, because I don't think you can jinx a team that you don't have that emotional connection to, right? Like I think that you
That's what I'm saying.
yeah. So but if your friend had said it, then for sure. I was at game 5 in Arizona, and the Phillies had a big lead late. And even with a 5-run lead and with 2 outs in the 9th inning, I still found a way to be nervous, right? Like I'm still doing the math in my head of like, oh, well, this guy gets on and then the next guy gets a hit. And then, oh, look who's up. And it's torturous. It's torturous in so many ways. Like, as at one point I remember with the Phillies, like they looked unbeatable and then all of a sudden they couldn't win a game. And I just remember being like briefly jealous of like Cleveland Guardians fans who didn't have to worry about anything, right? It's like, why do I spend the whole year rooting for my team to make the playoffs and then they do it and I'm too nervous to enjoy it?
I'll give you 2 quick stories that sort of play upon that. I am, as you know, a Red Sox fan.
Mm-hmm.
A long story behind that, but at one time I was a long-suffering Red Sox fan. Part 1 of this story, the two anecdotes are a week apart. I was at game 3 of the 2004 American League Championship Series at Fenway Park. I stayed until the bitter end. The Red Sox lost 19-8, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
And went down 3-0 in that ALCS. And it was not a pleasant atmosphere. I got on the tee to head back to my hotel. I was staying in Cambridge, and there were people all around me throwing various F-bombs out. I heard somebody say, why do I do this? Why do I invest my time in this crap? We've got the Patriots, which of course at that time, at the sort of outset of their dynasty, different story now. And then a week later, they win the World Series. And that moment of clarity, that moment of absolute peacefulness and zen, which very, very seldom comes to us as sports fans, washed upon me, Paul, because I was at game 4 of the World Series in St. Louis, October 27th, 2004. And the Boston Red Sox are up in that case, 3-0, and they are taking a lead into the 9th inning in game 4. And I could see what was going on. And intellectually, I knew, emotions aside, this thing is in the bag. The fan in us will always think the worst.
Yeah.
But the number of hurdles that they had to overcome to get to that point, and rationally speaking, and if you're a sports fan, you're not thinking rationally, you're not speaking rationally. I said, well, they're not going to blow this lead, A. All the momentum is with them, B. They are up 3-0, C. And only one time in the history of the sport has a team overcome a 3-game deficit to win a series. And that was last week. It's not going to happen. And I had this peripheral vision, Paul, the likes of which we've heard about with Joe Montana, seeing the field. So it was peaceful and happy all at the same time.
Amazing.
And just the last thing about this, because I know we have other things to get to, I could not help but think during the National League Championship Series, watching Craig Kimbrell go out there, and this was not his fault. The bats went cold, the wheels fell off the bus. Yeah. He did not help things. However, I will think about being in Los Angeles at Dodger Stadium and remembering how Alex Cora did not trust his closer, his future Hall of Fame closer, to slam the door on the Dodgers and close out the World Series. He brought Chris Sale in from the bullpen.
It's funny what the playoffs do to you, right? Like, and I mean, I even think about that game 7 of the National League Championship Series. Bryce Harper hit a ball with an exit velocity of 107 miles per hour. And I saw the stats later that he had hit something like 748 on balls that were hit with an exit velocity of 107 miles an hour or more, including with 60 hits, and 15 of them were home runs. And there were 2 runners on, and the Phillies were down 4-2 in the 7th inning when this happened. And like he sort of dropped his bat for just a split second where he thought he got it. He thought he had hit a 3-run home run, just like he did against the Padres last year. And, or I guess he had a 2-run home run against the Padres last year, but it was one of those those moments, right? Like where it's an absolute fraction, a tiny fraction of a second or a tiny fraction of an angle on the ball. That is the difference between the Phillies being in the World Series and the Phillies not being in the World Series. And the baseball will absolutely break your heart every single time. And so this is funny, right? Because I had a list of things we were going to talk about, and here we are 10 minutes in, still talking about
them. We will get to them, but A. Bartlett Giamatti, the late baseball commissioner, a poet as baseball commissioner, who said in the Green Fields of Mind, it is designed to break your heart, Paul. Mm-hmm. It breaks your heart. And just lastly, on the 2023 Phillies closing the door, here's the thing. You can talk all about all the advanced metrics you want. This team trying to put balls in the air and having them come up in that different air in Arizona, in Philly, whatever it was, they did not change their approach. Yeah. And teams that bash very, very seldom go deep into October. I'm sure we could all cite examples where teams hit their way through the month of October, but when faced with these pesky little gnats running around the bases, taking two, stealing, all this stuff, the Phillies stuck with their approach. And I think with a couple of, with a little bit of retrospect, they probably should have changed that approach. Getting guys on base is key. You got to get guys on base to score. You're not going to, they lived and they died with the Schwarbomb is what I'm talking about, Paul.
The giant domed shopping mall of a ballpark in Arizona.
Yes.
So, this episode, the title of this episode is going to have something to do with apostrophes. But before we get to the Orioles and their loathsome upside down apostrophe, the World Series, since we're talking about the World Series, you created something that I absolutely loved that I saw on social media that you tweeted about, where you imagined, and this is something that you like to do. You like to imagine historical logos and then create them from your imagination. You created a series of historical World Series logos that never existed. And so I'm curious about that project. And why did you undertake that project, and what was your process for that?
Well, let me begin with the fact that I put something out on social media that explained the fact that the first World Series logo, the first real World Series logo, did not exist until 1978. And somebody argued with me, somebody arguing on social media. Can you imagine?
That doesn't sound right. Yeah, it's not any platform I've been on.
However, I will say this. I was at the 1977 World Series at Yankee Stadium in the Bronx, and there was no logo. Okay. Yeah. There's something on a ticket, but that was the only thing it was applied to. In anticipation of the 75th World Series in 1978, baseball embarked upon a formal logo, and we've had formal logos ever since. So here's the scoop, Paul. In 2003, in anticipation of the 100th anniversary of the modern World Series, I was commissioned by Major League Baseball to populate an art program with research and renderings of all the official logos. So the digital era really begins in about 1992. That's easy. It was just compiling that stuff, but it was making digital things that were analog prior to then. Okay, so that's 1978 to 91. And to think about what World Series logos might have looked like if they were actual World Series logos prior to then. The strategy involved utilizing media pins, press pins, where available. So media pins are not sold at retail. They are little pieces of history. They're quite graphically beautiful in many cases. And so there were examples of, let's say, the 1955 Dodgers press pin. Well, all it has is a Dodgers cap on a baseball. It was about an inch in diameter. There were some press pins which I amended to make a little bit more, saleable for this purpose. But the stuff that you're talking about, there were no press pins from 1903 until 1910, and there were some that just did not translate to the task at hand. So in those cases, I went and I researched authentic pieces of what a club might have worn, and letter forms that were true to the era and the right kind of messaging. So, for example, the 1908 Cubs creating a logo celebrating the 1908 Cubs. The Cub in question came from a letterhead design, which kind of appeared on their uniform. So that's where that all came from. Very cool project. I always think about this stuff, and I kind of consider myself a creative time traveler if I were a designer in 1908.
A creative time traveler
and drawing,
you and in the image that you tweeted out 9 of these logos, including the 07 and the 08 Cubs. I think my favorite on here is the 1929 Philadelphia A's with the it's a blue pin shaped like a keystone, like Pennsylvania, and has the A's elephant on it. And of course, I'm also, just because I'm a Phillies fan, drawn to the 1910 A's with the Liberty Bell on it. But these are really fun, right? Like this is, and you've got the 1957, the Milwaukee Braves with the outline of the shape of Wisconsin there. So it's a really fun project that you did, and it's really fun to sort of imagine what these logos would have looked like. The process, coming from media pins is I had, obviously didn't know that part of the story. So that's very cool. I really enjoy that a lot. You have, what did you call it? Your graphic design, time traveling designer on social media. You're so much fun to follow because you're constantly tweeting out these little tidbits that you're finding as you're researching, right? Like news articles from the 20s and 30s about uniforms that teams were wearing. You have a really strong affinity, I think, as most graphic designers do, for printed ticket stubs that you can hold in your hand and put in a shadow box and keep as a memento. Which came first, the chicken or the egg here, right? Like, is it your interest in sort of the history of design and, the pleasure that you get out of researching old design and typography and iconography? Or did that lead to you, getting involved in these projects? Because you've done other projects that involved sort of envisioning graphic design projects from, previous eras. Did your interest in researching the history of graphic design lead you to these projects, or did these projects lead you to researching design?
The first one is the way to put it.
Okay.
So to give you an example, I've always been fascinated with the iconography of sports, particularly baseball, stuff that goes beyond logos or uniforms. When we are talking about printed matter, like you said, programs, ephemera, stuff, ticket stubs, pins. As a matter of fact, Paul, something you probably don't know, a first-year project in college. So this is 1982. Before most listeners were probably born, I explored the iconography of baseball with a triptych, 3 large paintings, probably 3 feet long each, maybe 2 feet high, something like that, in acrylic paint that covered the history of baseball starting in the 19th century and going right up to what was then the present day. So I think I had the 82 Cardinals on there maybe. And all done in acrylic paint. So this has been a source of fascination for me since I was a teenager, and it continues to this day, all these years later.
First of all, I love that the word triptych has made an appearance on the Baseball by Design podcast. Absolutely love that.
Ligatures, triptychs, we're talking big words here.
Absolutely. Maybe that's like episode 162 is triptychs in baseball.
There probably aren't too many, but except like maybe a big 1, 2, 3 middle of the lineup kind of situation.
Oh yeah, this the number 3 in baseball graphic design. How to the holy trinity of baseball design. I don't know. We'll find a way to work that into an episode at some point. What was, in terms of these World Series, you were commissioned to do these World Series logos, these reimagined World Series logos. What was the practical application for those? Did they sell them through MLB, or where can people find those?
They are still on apparel. 20 years after I created them, they're on, things like t-shirts, caps, side patches of fitted caps 20 years ago, but it was a licensing initiative. Part of this project was, again, in conjunction with the 100th anniversary of the World Series, right?
Mm-hmm.
Radio Shack. I am holding a series of postcards, which I designed,
Wow. This is for the listener.
Yeah.
an amazing collection of old-timey postcards. I certainly remember the days when you could buy a whole pack of postcards that were attached, and then you just sort of tore them off at a perforation. These are obviously still intact. This is amazing. So an amazing series of World Series postcards. Todd, where can I find those?
In my office, Paul. I
That's
don't
the
know
last
where.
one.
I'll hold one for you. I have several. I'd be
The,
happy to get one to you.
the
But
next time the Phillies are
yeah,
in the World Series, I'll ask you to bring me one of those.
all right,
Pretty-
we can make that happen. We need to speak to Bryce Harper and Dave Dombrowski, but no. And so, really, again, the thought in terms of marking the 100th anniversary of the first modern World Series, and how to appeal to fans, and how to appeal to fans' wallets. Right?
Yeah.
You need art, and so again, you want art that's going to be true to the brand and going to be useful and saleable at the point of purchase. So to get back to the question, yeah, these were applied to all sorts of licensed merchandise, and you still see them on broadcast these days. Again, you'll see it on product here in Philly. I'll see people walking around with a T-shirt with, probably from Mitchell and Ness or Shive Sports here in the Phillies, with that 1929 Philadelphia Athletics mark that you referenced. So they're out there 20 years after they were created.
Absolutely. Well, that is something to go track down. We're talking about the Athletics, Todd, and at the time of this recording, it is relatively fresh news. Not that the A's are moving, but that the owners just voted unanimously to approve that move. And you actually tweeted out, speaking about finding your design research and your affinity for tweeting out old news articles and whatnot. You tweeted out a tale of four cities, and you've got obviously Philadelphia, Kansas City, Oakland, and now you've imagined, or someone has imagined, the Las Vegas Athletics logo based on the existing Oakland Athletics logo. From a branding perspective, I'm not asking you to weigh in on, whether the team should have sold or what happened in Oakland and whatnot, but from a branding perspective, if you're the Athletics franchise and you are about to change cities, is there more value in the brand equity in the Athletics identity, or is there value in creating an entirely new brand? If you were advising this team whether to keep it as close to the Athletics existing branding or come up with an entirely new brand, what do you think? What's the best move for a team changing cities in a sort of painful fashion like this?
Well, let's start with the reality of it. The reality of it is that Oakland's ownership, their owner, John Fisher, has said that they are retaining the A's name and heritage in taking it to Las Vegas. So that, whether or not that happens, we'll see. But that's the desire. And the stated desire was to retain all of that equity, all of that history. The fact that this is a franchise that was born here in Philadelphia in 1901, has won World Series in two of those cities, Philly and in Oakland, over the last 55 years. So that's apparently what they're going to do. I think you can split the baby, if you want to put it that way. If you are going to carry this heritage over, then there's an opportunity here to kick things forward a little bit. The Oakland Athletics, as they currently look, very closely adhere to their last major rebrand, which took place in 1987. So it's a long time ago. And it's a good look, and they have this thing going for them, which, so many fans gravitate toward, which is this unique color scheme in baseball, with the green and gold, and green got a little bit more vibrant in 2018. And that was in celebration of the team's 50th anniversary in the East Bay. So I think that you would want to kick this forward a little bit. What is Vegas as a construct, right? I think that it's probably quite different from somebody who lives there, as opposed to you or I, people who have been there. The glitz and gold, shiny gold that exists in Vegas, as someone who drops in there and, eats and drinks and gambles and watches a show, or do you do whatever you do, is quite different from a person living there. So I think you'd really need to get into the psychology of what makes somebody a Las Vegan these days, and see what they're going to gravitate toward. Now, having said that, you got an NHL team, which was a true expansion team, successful, wildly successful, very early in their existence, and they leaned into this Vegas look, but they were starting with nothing. And then the contrast to that was the Raiders, right, who simply carried their time-honored look over from Oakland and from LA and from Oakland before that. So I think the truth is going to be somewhere in the middle, I suspect, for the transplanted Las Vegas Athletics.
Yeah. I've been to both a Golden Knights and a Las Vegas Raiders game. It was interesting to me to see the fans who clearly were holdovers from Oakland, right? Like, these are not the fans who were at this game who were just super diehard in your face. It was a Raiders Eagles game. And so I was all Eagles up, and there were a ton of Eagles fans because that's what's going to happen in Las Vegas for any visiting team. But the Raiders fans were, these were not new Raiders fans. You could tell by the way they were cheering their team on. And I think that I'm really curious to see whether the Oakland A's fans stick with their team the way the Oakland Raiders fans seem to have stuck with the Las Vegas Raiders. So it's a really interesting thing. You're shaking your head no.
Not going to happen.
No.
You can't duplicate that and scale that up to 81 home games. It's impossible. Yeah. Now, I would think, without knowing anything about this, and I'll just do disclosure, I'll put that out there, they are going to be banking on bachelor or bachelorette parties. Let's drop into Vegas. Let's go to a game. Let's get a suite, high rollers, this kind of a thing. But again, the scalability, given the length of the Major League Baseball season, is going to be impossible to duplicate. It goes back to the old thing about, if you're a baseball fan, it really does require a commitment. It's kind of like a marriage. You've got to work on it every day. Whereas if you're an NFL fan, it's like having a hot torrid affair. You can drop in and, disrupt your weekend and and start looking forward to it on Thursday, and your life gets back to normal on Tuesday morning. Not the same thing in baseball. Sorry.
Yeah. And you're speaking to exactly what's going to happen. I will absolutely go to Las Vegas to see the Phillies play. I mean, my buddies and I like to go to Vegas anyway, and so we will absolutely go when our teams are there, to see a ball game, and that's exactly what they're counting on. It's going to be 50% away fans every single game.
Totally. And I responded to somebody on Twitter/X earlier today who was, again, that reference to the history. Somebody dropped in with kind of dissing Vegas, and I've got no dog in the fight, but I said I got married there, so I've got a little bit of a soft spot, as weird a place as it is.
Yeah. The A's, coincidentally, how about this segue, Todd? Get ready for this. This is why
I'm ready for it.
This is why I am a podcast professional here, having made dozens of dollars doing this over the course of almost 2 years. The A's have a logo with an apostrophe in it. Their primary logo has an apostrophe in it. Typographically, kind of a challenge. Big A, apostrophe, little s. So the whole scale of like, how big do you make this apostrophe? And of course, the impetus for this episode is, of course, the Baltimore Orioles, who at the beginning of the playoffs, I put $5 on to win the World Series because I saw them play in Philadelphia when they were there, and I thought they were just the team to beat. I thought they looked really great. But when it comes to overall the typography of apostrophes in logos, and in particular the Orioles, well, we'll get to the Orioles and the fact that theirs is upside down and backwards. I don't know if we've made any progress on that conversation since the last time we talked, but as a designer who deals a lot in type, what are the challenges that a team like the A's faces in that logo to achieve some sort of balance and to make that apostrophe look natural in a logo?
Well, it's impossible. There is no right or wrong way to do it. And let's start with the fact that a little history lesson, the Old English A for the Athletics dates back to the 1860s here in Philadelphia. So before this current franchise, which dates back to 1901, the name Athletics associated with baseball since the beginnings of the game, and the Old English letter form A associated with the franchise or with the name, whatever you want to call it, for a long time. So you start with that and you build upon it. And whoever designed the current A's mark with the apostrophe, their name is lost to time. But they obviously took an uninvasive approach, Paul. They went with something very simple to put adjacent to that. So is it superscript? Is it subscript? Is it somewhere in the middle? I have no idea, but I will say that there are no rules that apply to this. But to your point, as it relates to Baltimore, at least they got the direction of the apostrophe right.
So the
you had one job.
The A's logo, it has the Old English A as you're describing, and it's got like a sans serif apostrophe S. The A is centered, and then the apostrophe S is just sort of off to the side, and like as you say, sort of as unobtrusive as possible. The Orioles logo, since it's not, so the Orioles logo has a script capital O, and then a script lowercase s, which that lowercase s, if you just pulled it out and showed it to someone today and said, what letter is this? It is not super recognizable even as a letter S. Yeah. I know we talked about this, and all we said, the last time when we said this episode was coming, was we were just going to spew vitriol at this apostrophe. But is there anything in your professional design opinion that would account for the Baltimore Orioles having an upside down backwards apostrophe? It looks like a or it looks like an inverted comma, maybe. Is there anything in your professional design experience that can explain this?
No, plain and simple. No. You might have seen this, just as an aside, when the Orioles broke out a home run chain a couple of years ago for the players, right? Which is a very popular notion. The apostrophe was righted for some reason. So basically they took it to some jeweler. This is not one of these commercially available ones, even though they're available now. You could buy them at the ballpark, but the apostrophe was righted. And I wonder, who saw that and decided to correct an error. No, there's no reason for that. It's not aesthetic. It's just a weird thing. And the fact that it has endured for as long as it has is a total and complete mystery.
This is the amazing thing about it, because I was thinking about like the A's current logo, which you said was from 1987. I don't think a letter and an apostrophe is going to make it in today's focus group world, right? Like I don't think you could have a letter apostrophe S is going to make it out of the first focus group. And so, the fact that the A's are still the A's with the apostrophe S is kind of a remnant of history. This remnant of history, of design history here, this apostrophe S, the O upside down backwards apostrophe script S, is just the absolute like most wild thing that like no one has looked at that and said, like, let's just like, how about in 2024 we won't tell anyone that it's happening, let's just rotate it and see if anyone notices. It's amazing.
But I'm gonna jump in and say that I would respectfully say that we are seeing a development in Major League Baseball logos, not at the minor league level, which I know that's the bread and butter of what you talk about. But at the major league level, think about the fact that the Pittsburgh Pirates have devolved to a P as their primary mark. The San Diego Padres have done the same thing. We've got several teams that are, either considering, or are gonna. I mean, this is a long-term trend, and it's about brevity in terms of how we communicate, how everything kind of breaks down to an avatar. So I would say that the A apostrophe S kind of like says it all. Now you could build upon that for other uses, but for the tip of the iceberg, the spearhead of the brand, maybe it makes sense.
Yeah, I have. I think so. I see it. It still just amazes me, and I know that we couldn't spend the whole episode talking about this, but One of these days I'm going to get, someone in the Orioles design department on the horn and ask this question. Until then, it will remain a mystery. And speaking of brevity, Todd, I have kept you way longer than I thought I was going to. It always happens when we have these conversations. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on and do an episode that ostensibly was just about apostrophes. As always, I've got your books here next to me. Winning Ugly, which is an amazing collection of articles about baseball uniforms. And then with our mutual friend, Chris Creamer, Fabric of the Game, about hockey uniforms. And of course, on all the socials, at Todd Radom. Todd, thank you so much for coming on and being part of episode 107 as promised.
Paul, thank you. It is always a pleasure, my friend. Do we need to pick another random number?
Well,
and I'll tell you what, we can do one of two things. We can pick a random number for the podcast and then go to Vegas and put it all on red if it's the correct digits. No, maybe we won't do that.
We threw out episode 162 and triptychs, so maybe we'll find a way to make that work in some way. The number 3 trinities, something like that. So until episode 162, Todd, thank you again. Happy New Year, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks so much, Paul. Appreciate you.
All right, everyone, welcome back. So pleased to be joined by my friend Dan Simon once again for his weekly installment of Studio Simon Stumpers. Dan, hello, how you doing?
I am, as always, Paul, fantastic, and I mean it.
Glad to hear that. Glad to be speaking with you once again for the Baseball by Design Studio Simon Stumper segment. Let's get into it. This episode came to being back in episode 58, when Todd Radom, our mutual friend Todd Radom, and I were chatting, and the subject of the Baltimore Orioles upside down backwards apostrophe came up, and Todd agreed to come back almost a year later and talk about apostrophes. We were sort of all over the place. Listeners to this episode know already that we were sort of all over the place, and we didn't spend a ton of time talking about apostrophes, but that is ostensibly the subject of this episode, is baseball nicknames and logos with apostrophes in them. And so just off the top of my head here, you've got the Oakland A's, obviously, soon to be the Las Vegas A's. The Vancouver Canadians have a C's logo. The Seattle Mariners have an M's logo with an apostrophe in it. Who else? The O's, obviously, we mentioned the O's with their upside down backwards apostrophe with the poor letter spacing. It's just an objectionable logo all around. And then very recently, the Oakland B's for ballers in the Independent Pioneer League were just announced. So that's just a handful of logos. I'm sure there's others out there. What's your opinion as a designer when you are charged with putting an apostrophe in a logo? Are there Dan Simon logos out there that have apostrophes in them?
Yes, I've done at least 2 off the top of my head that I can think of right now. I might have done more, and I really love doing that because it's a baseball convention. It's the Oakland A's. I think that would be the first team to do it, but then there were certainly many more. And the 2 Studio Simon ones off the top of my head that I can remember having done, one is the Collegiate Summer League Birmingham Bells. And you might think, well, where's the apostrophe there? Well, one of their logos that I did as part of the logo suite I created for them is a bell with an apostrophe S next to it. So I use that convention solely because of the Oakland A's, because it's a baseball thing. Also, I did an alternate identity for the Kannapolis Cannonballers. They play in Kannapolis, North Carolina, famous for its barbecue. And in Kannapolis, they have an annual festival called Jiggy with the Piggy, which is a barbecue festival. And so for that, to coincide with that, we did an alternate identity for the Kannapolis Qs. And there is a Q apostrophe S logo that's part of that logo suite. So love it. Love apostrophes and logos.
We spoke about that when that identity was unveiled. It was not on this podcast, but you were quoted about it in my sports logos article on the Kannapolis Qs when that identity first came out.
Okay. And as a graphic designer, and maybe just being somebody who's as anal as I am a stickler for a pet peeve of mine, I should say, is the improper use of apostrophes.
Mm-hmm. Not just as a designer, but as we've spoken about previously, you're a linguistic enthusiast, and you're a fan of grammar and usage, as I am. Not just the visual typography of setting apostrophes in a logo, but also, the actual use of them and what is their function as a grammatical system.
Well, yes, I'm definitely like that. That is due to the fact that my mom was an editor, and she edited me as a child growing up, and it stuck. And now I see things the way she does, or did, I should say. We can go down a whole rabbit hole here. We're going to go partially down this rabbit hole.
Okay.
Two things. Number one was, I remember going to, and I still have this as a photo on my phone, going to a Jersey Mike's with my son, Casey, and they had a big jar on the counter, which I don't see at other Jersey Mike's, that had large dill pickles in it. And they had a piece of paper on there that they had obviously printed out from their office printer that they had maybe in the back room there at that Jersey Mike's, that said pickles, as if you really needed something to describe what was obviously in that jar. But it said pickles, but it was pickle apostrophe S.
It's great.
And Casey and I, to this day, we joke about it and we go, pickles what? Like, what was what was it that pickle possessed? So, but the other one is, there was a restaurant here in Louisville called O'Charlie's. Do you have O'Charlie's where you are?
I don't think so. No, it doesn't sound familiar.
Okay, well, O'Charlie's came out with a new logo that then was emblazoned on the outside of every one of their restaurants, however many there were. And as many O names are, O'Neill, O'Shaughnessy, whatever, it's O apostrophe. But then there was also an apostrophe S at the end of O'Charlie. There were two apostrophes in it. The apostrophe between the O and the C at the beginning was a correct apostrophe. The apostrophe between the Y and the S was a foot, foot and inches,
Yep.
one line
Yep.
for foot, two lines for inches, was a
no.
foot thing. So not only did they get the apostrophe wrong by not having it be an apostrophe, it was the foot thing. And I don't even know the word for what that foot thing is, the mark. But in the same logo, they had two apostrophes, and all you had to do is use another apostrophe and got it wrong.
Just copy and paste is all. Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
I don't even know how that's possible. It drove me, and to this, even though the restaurant is closed, just the thought of it to this day is such a weight on my shoulders. I lose sleep over it to this day.
Carry that around with you. I'm curious to know, speaking of that weight, I mean, the impetus for this episode was the enduring mystery of this inexplicable upside down backwards logo and the O's logo. Do you have a theory on that? Todd and I did not sort that out. We just chalked it up to it's a mystery. Do you have a feeling on it, a theory about it? Like why it happened in the first place and why it is allowed to continue existing?
I have no theory on why. I do have a theory on both of those. Let's do the first part, how it happened.
All right.
Of course, we weren't there, and I don't know this, but it is a matter of, well, first of all, human fallibility. Somebody made a mistake. Okay, there's that, and that's allowable. We're all fallible, me especially. But in that case, in the case of apostrophes, I mentioned this O'Charlie's word mark that had the foot symbol as one of the apostrophes, and people just don't notice that. They're just not as I am a graphic designer, but I also think just in one of the reasons I might be a graphic designer is because I'm hyper visually aware, and I see things, and I can tell you my wife would never ever notice. My wife's an incredibly intelligent woman, but and her grammar is better than mine. Her education was better than mine. Her knowledge is greater than mine. But if she saw a foot symbol where an apostrophe should be, she would not notice that that was not correct. So the person who put this upside down or backwards or rotated 180 degrees apostrophe in the O's mark I'm guessing did not realize it was not correct. And the theory behind why they haven't changed it is because it's become a thing. And I'm sure it's been pointed out to them. And it's kind of like they're digging in their heels, and sticking to their guns. They're just saying, okay, we're wrong, and we're going to keep being wrong. It was like, oh gosh, it was a recent episode of the Baseball by Design podcast where when you pointed out that something was not correct about their either name or their logo, they just said, yeah, we know. That was his answer.
That was the Bisons, because bison, the plural of bison is bison. And so the Bisons pronounced the S as a soft S, and they put an S on the end of the word bison, which is not the way you pluralize that word. And so when you say to them, hey, you're the Buffalo Bisons, when in fact you should be the Buffalo Bison, they say, yeah, we know, but we've been that since 1880 something, and we're not going to change it.
Yes, that's it. And that, I think that's the case with the O's logo. They're basically saying they're celebrating their wrongness.
All right.
But our Studio Simon Stumper today does not relate to apostrophes, but it does relate to you referenced, you actually said that the apostrophe in question is backwards. And again, whether it's backwards or rotated 180 degrees incorrectly or whatever, backwards is one of the things you can say about it. So here we go with our Studio Simon Stumper. There was an outfielder in the 50s and 60s named Jimmy Pearsall, who was best known for his well-publicized battles with mental illness during his 17-year major league career, which led to the 1957 biographical major motion picture about his life, Fear Strikes Out, starring Anthony Perkins. Coincidentally, of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho fame, Pearsall did something backwards in his baseball career that made headlines. So our Studio Simon Stumper today asks, what was the thing he did backwards? Did he, A, run out to his position on opening day wearing his jersey, pants, and cap backwards? B, threw a pitch over his head while standing backwards on the pitching rubber? Or C, backpedaled around the bases backwards after hitting a home run?
Before you gave me the three options, I was going to say he ran to third base instead of first base, but that's not one of the options. So my initial guess is out the window. The one that sounds, and I don't know the answer to this question, so it's sussing time. Wearing your uniform backwards is funny, but sounds uncomfortable. I'm not sure how well that would work. So maybe it's a possibility, but I don't think so. Throwing the pitch backwards just sounds mechanically very difficult. Like, it sounds like you wouldn't be able to get close to home plate. Backpedaling around the bases, sounds super slightly vaguely familiar to me, and also like the most like realistic possibility for something someone would actually do in a baseball game. So because of that, I'm going to go with option C, backpedaled around the bases after a home run.
Okay. I am particularly proud of you here. You get a cigar because you got this one correct.
Nice.
The reason I'm so particularly proud of you is the reasoning you gave for each one was really, really good reasoning. And I laughed when you said, wearing, your jersey and pants backwards would be uncomfortable. Yeah, it would be. And it might be a little difficult, to, I don't know, really to move around in it. But yeah, that's correct. And the thing about throwing a pitch over your head would also be difficult. And you reasoned that out very well, and you were correct. So here's the story behind it. By the way, okay. I urge Baseball by Design listeners, if you haven't heard of Jimmy Pearsall, or if you don't know, maybe you've heard about him, but you don't know a lot about him, go to his baseball reference page. There's this thing called the Baseball Bio Project that SABR does, where SABR members voluntarily write biographies, not books, but just like a long post about a particular player's entire life. I guarantee you Jimmy Pearsall has a SABR bio. I've not read that because I was already familiar with his life. I mentioned the movie about his life, Fear Strikes Out. It was originally a book. It was not a biography. It was an autobiography where he had help from a writer. He is one of baseball's all-time characters, and I think you get a real kick out of learning about Jimmy Pearsall. So here's the story about his running backwards around the bases. And again, he didn't run from third to second to first to home. He ran the right way around the bases, but he basically did the 1960s version of a moonwalk, So here's the story about it. He was disappointed by the lack of attentions sports writers gave to his then teammate, Duke Snider. They were both playing with the Mets at the time. Duke Snider, of course, famous for playing for the Brooklyn and Los Angeles Dodgers. But he was at the very end of his career with this is 1963, the second year of the New York Mets, when they were a horrible baseball team. Jimmy Pearsall was disappointed by the lack of attention sports writers paid to Duke Snider after he hit his 400th career home run a week earlier. Pearsall had 99 career home runs at the time, and he was determined to make his 100th career home run memorable, that they would write about. So when he hit that home run on June 23rd, 1963, the way he made it memorable was by running around the bases. Now, in a 1994 interview, Pearsall is quoted as saying, "I picked up the papers the next day and I wasn't in the sports section. I was on the front page." So he got the attention he wanted from the press, but his manager, Casey Stengel, the Mets manager at the time, was not as tickled with his antics and released him days later. So now here's something interesting that I think you'll enjoy as a Philadelphia Phillies fan. First of all, he hit that home run in a game against the Philadelphia Phillies, and the pitcher that day was Dallas Green, what would Dallas Green later do, Paul Caputo?
He would lead the 1980 Philadelphia Phillies to their first ever World Series championship as their manager.
Right. So there's that connection. But from what I've read, apparently, as the pitcher, Dallas Green was understandably, as far as I understand, not too pleased with Pearsall's hijinks. However, in 1986, when Dallas Green was the general manager of the Chicago Cubs, he hired Jimmy Pearsall as a roving minor league outfield coach. Jimmy Pearsall won 2 Gold Gloves as an outfielder. Matter of fact, Casey Stengel, he was quoted as saying he managed Joe DiMaggio, and he said, I've always said that Joe DiMaggio was the greatest defensive outfielder I've ever seen. And he said, until I saw Jimmy Pearsall play the outfield. So that's how good of an outfielder he was. So he was, for 14 years, he was a roving minor league outfield coach for the Chicago Cubs, who trained in Mesa, Arizona. And one year, when I was living in Los Angeles, my friend Paul Conrath and I went to spring training in Arizona, and I saw Jimmy Pearsall there. And I was so excited to meet him because I knew all about him and what a character he was. And I had a baseball with me, and he signed it. So I've got a Jimmy Pearsall baseball.
Dan, this Stumper was a doozy. I really enjoyed what you did with the, taking the backwards apostrophe and turning that into a stumper about something that happened backwards in baseball. So, Dan, thank you so much, and I'll see you in a week.
Thank you once again for having me, and looking forward to the next episode and the next Stumper. So see ya.